Hey everyone, it's Bronze Builder Plays, and we're building our civilization in Millennia. This is episode 3. We are entering the Bronze Age. The Age of Bronze paved the way for most empires' national identities to begin forming. The United States was that of the wild hunters. These were people who thrived not only in hunting game, but also utilizing those resources extremely efficiently. This allowed for their influence to stretch out further into unclaimed lands around Chicago. And as Chicago grew, so did the population's ambitions. We're seeing by 4700 BCE that olives are starting to be harvested outside the main settlement, pushing the growth of that settlement to brand new heights, and the simplest of economies growing even more and more complex. But this growth came with differences of opinions, and some of those differences had to be resolved by the sword. Dissonance and disobedience was dealt with by force in these early ages. By 4200 BCE, the United States had come in contact with yet another empire, the Ottomans. Those initial relations were neutral at best, but most of the centralized powers of both the Persians and Ottomans, they were still too far away to cause any real conflict or thrift. But those adversarial relationships would bubble below the brief interactions between these people. Now, on the outskirts, we still had raiders, barbarians. Those threats to a civilized society in Chicago were rampant in these unclaimed lands, especially to the northeast of Chicago. But the centralization of power and the creation of armies would continue to prove beneficial as they dealt with these threats far away from the settlement of Chicago. And now this allowed for Chicago to grow even more. The development of dwellings were like the modern day suburbs of today, and they allow for more people to live and work in the settlement. And by 3700 BCE, we start seeing the modernization of some resources. Very simple, but logs from a nearby forest are processed into lumber in a nearby saw pit. This is the earliest known industrial site in the United States. And the United States had a major focus on industry. We can assume this was because of how well fed the people were due to the wild hunters' proficiencies, and in combination with how well they utilized those resources from their hunts. For example, we found evidence that deer bones were used as tools, which further proves how efficient the game was used. Little, if any, of the game was wasted. The known world was becoming more vast. Persia sat to the east. Antioch, an independent settlement that had developed their own customs, had sprawled out into the southwestern desert. And Sundsvall sat on the southern peninsula. Sundsvall was the target of diplomatic pressure from envoys from the United States, so much so that the independent settlement became the first settlement beyond Chicago to align itself under United States customs and culture. By 2600 BCE, the Bronze Age came to a close, and the world would slowly enter the Iron Age. We say slowly because many nations hadn't developed at the pace at which the Persians did. The United States was privy to the advancement because of their proximity, and new technological advancements of their neighbor posed a direct threat. So efforts were made for the United States to move quicker, which is why the conversion of Sundsvall was such a momentous event. It represented the realization and acknowledgement that the United States was behind in expansion and technology. Once the Iron Age started, we saw an explosion of expansionary expeditions. The establishment of Seattle, right on the fertile river where so many of our current vineyards are. Some of these vineyards have their origins as far back as 2500 BCE. Now, the United States was sprawling with 3 different regions, and this caused a sort of revolution. It was peaceful, but it was drastic. We know there were 2 major forms of government back then. Imperial dynasties and kingdoms. The United States adopted policies and traditions that closely align with kingdoms. The rapid expansion of new settlements and regions to claim new lands and continue to spread their ideologies to people, even if those people weren't willing. The Iron Age also saw industry improve rapidly, as did the expansion of the sciences and infrastructure for regions. But as more and more people packed into these regions, the seeds were planted for some potentially dangerous and deadly repercussions. Remember, it wasn't just the United States, but other empires had consolidated their people into these urban-like centers, and population booms were happening everywhere across the known world. This unchecked population boom, it was going to be halted in a devastating way.